The courtroom fell silent as Officer Richard Hayes collapsed to the marble floor. Above him stood Staff Sergeant Jasmine Washington, her knuckles still vibrating from the impact. Nobody moved. The judge's gavel hung midair. This wasn't supposed to happen, a black female military police officer taking down a decorated white cop. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more shocking true stories of justice being served in unexpected ways. Staff Sergeant Jasmine Washington arrived at the Montgomery County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, with purpose in her stride. The early morning sun gleamed off her meticulously pressed Army uniform, the military police insignia clearly visible. At 32, Jasmine had served 12 years in the Army, including 3 tours overseas. Today's mission was different, but no less important, testifying in defense of Specialist Derek Reynolds, a soldier in her unit falsely accused of assault during an off-base incident. The marble halls of the courthouse echoed with her footsteps as Jasmine approached the security checkpoint. She'd visited courtrooms before as an MP, but something about this place felt immediately hostile. "Hold up there," a stern voice called out. Officer Richard Hayes, a burly white man with 22 years on the Atlanta police force, stepped forward from behind the metal detector. His cold blue eyes narrowed as they traveled from Jasmine's face down to her uniform, ID, and purpose of visit. Jasmine maintained her military bearing. Staff Sergeant Washington here to testify in case number 47892, Your Honor. Hayes snorted. "I'm not a judge, and you need to go through security like everybody else." "Of course, officer." Jasmine placed her items in the tray and walked through the metal detector without incident. Hayes frowned when the machine remained silent. He motioned to her boots. "Take those off, too." Jasmine glanced around. Nobody else was being asked to remove their shoes. "Sir, I've already cleared the metal detector." "You'll do as you're told, or you won't get in," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the lobby. Several visitors turned to watch. Maintaining her composure, Jasmine removed her boots, placed them in the tray, and walked through again. Still nothing. "Now empty your pockets," Hayes demanded, though Jasmine had already done so. Officer Hayes called a security guard from the next station. "There's a line forming." Hayes ignored his colleague, his attention fixed solely on Jasmine. "What unit did you say you're with?" "I didn't, but I'm with the 313th Military Police Battalion," Jasmine replied calmly, though her patience was wearing thin. "Never heard of female MPs before," Hayes muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Times sure are changing. Next thing they'll let anyone wear a uniform." Jasmine remained silent, collecting her belongings. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice, and she wouldn't let it distract her from her purpose today. As the morning progressed, Jasmine found herself constantly under Hayes' watchful eye. When she visited the restroom, he was waiting outside. When she checked in with a court clerk, Hayes appeared questioning her credentials again. When she stepped out to make a phone call, he followed, standing uncomfortably close. "You know," Hayes said during one of these encounters, "most people respect the real police around here." "I respect all law enforcement officers," Sir Jasmine replied evenly. "Could have fooled me. You military types think you're above the law." Jasmine took a deep breath. "I assure you that's not the case." The courtroom doors opened, and people began filing in for the morning session. Jasmine moved toward the entrance, eager to put distance between herself and Hayes. Suddenly, Hayes stepped directly in her path, blocking the doorway. "Let me see that ID again." "Officer Hayes, you've verified my identity 3 times already," Jasmine said, her professional tone masking growing frustration. "The judge is waiting for my testimony." "You'll get in when I say you can get in." Hayes snarled, his face inches from hers. Other court attendees awkwardly moved around them. No one intervened. "Please step aside," Officer Jasmine requested firmly. "I have a duty to fulfill." Hayes' face reddened. "You people always think you deserve special treatment." The racial undertone was unmistakable. Jasmine felt a familiar knot in her stomach, the same feeling she'd had when facing discrimination throughout her career. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said quietly. "Just the same respect you'd show any other officer of the law." Something snapped in Hayes' expression. "Officer," he spat.
"You're not a real officer. You're just playing dress-up."
Jasmine straightened her shoulders and attempted to step around him. "I need to enter the courtroom now." What happened next occurred in mere seconds, though, to witnesses it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Hayes raised his hand and slapped Jasmine across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side. The crack echoed through the hallway. "Know your place, you uppitian." The racial slur hadn't fully left his lips when Jasmine reacted. Years of military police training took over. Her body moved with practiced precision, a defensive stance, a perfectly executed strike, and a sweeping move that used Hayes' own weight and momentum against him. Before anyone could intervene, Officer Hayes was on the floor unconscious. The hallway erupted in chaos. Court officers drew their weapons, all pointed at Jasmine. Cries of "gun gun" filled the air, though Jasmine was unarmed and had made no move toward her holsterless hip. On the ground, now shouted one officer, his weapon trained on Jasmine's head. Jasmine slowly raised her hands. "He assaulted me first. I acted in self-defense." But in that moment, all they saw was a black woman standing over a white police officer's unconscious body. The narrative was already writing itself in their minds. Down on the ground. Hands behind your back. The officers' shouts overlapped as they surrounded Jasmine. Weapons still drawn. Jasmine, trained in de-escalation techniques, complied immediately, lowering herself to the floor with measured movements. "I am Staff Sergeant Jasmine Washington, Military Police," she stated clearly. "Officer Hayes assaulted me first. I acted in self-defense." Her words seemed to evaporate in the chaos. Rough hands grabbed her wrists, wrenching them behind her back. The cold bite of handcuffs cut into her skin as they were fastened far tighter than necessary. "Check on Hayes," someone called out. The attention immediately shifted to the unconscious officer. Concern for his well-being overshadowed any consideration for Jasmine's account of events. Around them, courthouse visitors had their phones out recording everything. Some had captured Hayes' initial assault, while others had only started filming after he hit the ground. "I saw the whole thing." A middle-aged black woman called out from the gathering crowd. That officer hit her first. Her statement was ignored as Jasmine was yanked to her feet, the officers handling her with unnecessary force. "That's excessive," another bystander protested. "She's not resisting." "Back up, everyone. Back up," an officer commanded, establishing a perimeter around the scene. Meanwhile, Hayes was receiving gentle attention. Someone had placed a folded jacket under his head. A call for medical assistance had already gone out. Officer Down carried more urgency than any assault claim by Jasmine. From the sidelines, Detective Marcus Reeves observed the scene with growing discomfort. As one of the few black detectives in the department, he recognized the disparate treatment immediately. He'd been heading to court for another case when the commotion erupted. Now he stood frozen, watching institutional racism play out in real time. "She's military police," Reeves heard someone mention. "Called herself a staff sergeant." "Don't care if she's the Secretary of Defense," replied a uniformed officer. "You don't touch a cop." Reeves noted the irony. Hayes had touched her first, but that detail was already being washed away in the flood of blue solidarity. Jasmine remained composed as she was marched through the courthouse. Her military training had prepared her for high-stress situations, but nothing had prepared her for being treated like a criminal for defending herself. She felt the stares, heard the whispers. In some eyes, she saw sympathy, but most held judgment or fear. "I want to file charges against Officer Hayes for assault," Jasmine stated as she was processed. The booking officer snorted. Yeah, good luck with that. I have the right to press charges. He assaulted me first. You knocked out a police officer in a courthouse. You're not pressing anything except prison laundry if you're lucky. Jasmine was photographed, fingerprinted, and relieved of her personal belongings. Her uniform, a symbol of her service and accomplishment, was exchanged for an orange jumpsuit. The transformation from respected military officer to common criminal was swift and humiliating. In a stark holding cell, Jasmine sat alone back straight against the cold wall. She needed to contact her commanding officer. Colonel Franklin Briggs needed to know what had happened before the story became distorted beyond recognition. You get one phone call, a corrections officer eventually told her. Jasmine called Colonel Briggs directly. When he answered, she recounted the events in precise military fashion. Facts only, no embellishment. Stay put, Washington Briggs, responded, his voice grim. Do not speak to anyone else. I'm contacting our JAG office now. We'll have someone there within the hour. Yes, sir, Jasmine replied, drawing strength from the familiar military structure. Sir, my career. One thing at a time. Staff Sergeant, let's get you out of there first. After hanging up, the reality of her situation sank in. Jasmine had dedicated her life to upholding justice both in combat zones and on base. Now she sat in a cell facing charges that could end her military career and land her in prison, all because she refused to be a victim of assault and racial hatred. In the quiet cell, Jasmine closed her eyes. The right side of her face still stung from Hayes' slap. She wondered if anyone had bothered to photograph her injury, or if the only documentation would be of Hayes' condition. She already knew the answer. Detective Marcus Reeves, meanwhile, couldn't shake what he'd witnessed. Back at his desk, he pulled up Hayes' personnel file. It wasn't the first time Hayes had been involved in an incident with a person of color, but previous complaints had been buried or dismissed. Reeves closed the file, weighing his next move carefully. Speaking up could make him a target within the department, but remaining silent made him complicit. As day turned to evening, Jasmine remained in the holding cell. No charges had been formally filed yet, but she hadn't been released either. The system that was supposed to protect people was now being used to punish her for protecting herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. In the silence of her cell, Jasmine's thoughts turned to her father, a career Army man who had died serving in Iraq. Always stand tall, he used to tell her, even when they try to bring you to your knees. She straightened her shoulders. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall. The fluorescent lights in the interview room hummed overhead as Jasmine sat across from Gerald Thompson, her court-appointed attorney. Thompson, a balding man in his 50s with food stains on his tie, flipped through her case file with obvious disinterest. Let's make this simple, Thompson said without looking up. You assaulted a police officer in a courthouse full of witnesses. That's a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence. He assaulted me first, Jasmine replied evenly. I have the right to self-defense even against a police officer. Thompson sighed, finally meeting her eyes. Look, the DA is willing to offer a deal. Plead guilty to a lesser charge of misdemeanor assault, serve 6 months 3 with good behavior, and you're out. And my military career. Thompson shrugged. You'd likely receive a dishonorable discharge, but that's between you and the Army. So I should plead guilty to defending myself against an unprovoked racial assault. Jasmine's voice remained calm, but her eyes hardened. That's unacceptable. Miss Washington. Staff Sergeant Washington. Right, Thompson continued, visibly annoyed. The justice system isn't perfect, but it's what we've got. Take the deal. Fight this, and you're looking at 5 to 7 years. I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do, Jasmine stated firmly. Officer Hayes assaulted me and used a racial slur. Multiple witnesses saw it happen. Thompson closed the file. Witnesses change their stories when it's their word against a cop's. The system doesn't favor people who knock out police officers, regardless of circumstance. Before Jasmine could respond, the door opened. A sharply dressed Asian American woman entered, followed by Colonel Briggs in his formal Army uniform. "This interview is over," the woman announced. "I'm Captain Sophia Chen, JAG Corps. Staff Sergeant Washington is now represented by the United States Army." Thompson appeared relieved. "She's all yours," he said, gathering his papers. "Good luck. You'll need it." After Thompson left, Colonel Briggs approached Jasmine. "At ease. Staff Sergeant, are you being treated properly?" "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied, though the tight handcuffs had left marks on her wrists. "We're working to get you released," Captain Chen explained, taking the seat Thompson had vacated. "The charges are excessive, but we're up against significant resistance." "From whom?" Jasmine asked. District Attorney Walter Simmons Briggs answered. "He's up for re-election this year and has built his campaign on being tough on crime. Your case has already hit the news cycle." Chen opened her laptop and turned it to show Jasmine the headlines. "Military officer attacks police in courthouse rampage Army. MP knocks out. Local hero cop blue under attack military aggression in Atlanta court." Jasmine's stomach tightened. None of that is accurate. "The police department is controlling the narrative," Chen explained. "Officer Hayes is being portrayed as a victim who was simply doing his job when he was viciously attacked. What about the witnesses who saw him? Slap me. They're being discredited or intimidated into changing their statements," Briggs said grimly. "The thin blue line is closing ranks." Meanwhile, across town, District Attorney Walter Simmons was holding a press conference outside police headquarters. "This attack on one of Atlanta's finest officers is not just an assault on law enforcement. It's an assault on our community's values," Simmons declared to the assembled reporters. "Officer Hayes was simply maintaining courthouse security when this individual used her military combat training to inflict serious harm." Behind him stood Police Chief Gregory Reynolds and several officers, including some who had witnessed the actual incident but remained silent. Back in the interview room, Captain Chen outlined Jasmine's defense strategy. "Your service record is exemplary," Chen noted. 2 Purple Hearts Bronze Star with Valor Device, multiple commendations. You've served in Iraq and Afghanistan with distinction." "Will that matter?" Jasmine asked. "It should," Chen replied. "But we're fighting more than just legal charges here. We're fighting a system that's designed to protect its own, even when they're clearly in the wrong." Colonel Briggs paced the small room. "Hayes has a history of excessive force complaints, particularly against people of color. Most were buried or dismissed due to lack of evidence." "How do you know?" "That," Jasmine asked. Briggs and Chen exchanged glances. "We have a source inside the department," Chen said cautiously. Unknown to them, Detective Marcus Reeves was at that moment reviewing security camera footage from the courthouse. The angle clearly showed Hayes blocking Jasmine's path, the exchange of words, and the unprovoked slap. It also captured Hayes' mouth forming the racial slur before Jasmine defended herself. Reeves copied the footage to a secure drive before anyone could accidentally delete it. His career might be on the line, but his conscience wouldn't let him remain silent. The tension between local police and military personnel escalated as news of the incident spread. Police officers viewed Jasmine's actions as an attack on their authority, while military members saw it as yet another example of police overreach and racial bias. At her arraignment the next morning, Jasmine stood tall in her orange jumpsuit as the charges were read. Assault on a peace officer battery with intent to cause serious bodily harm, resisting arrest. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Jasmine responded clearly. Bail is set at $500,000. The amount was outrageous, far higher than typical for similar charges. The message was clear. The system wanted Jasmine to remain behind bars. As Jasmine was led back to her cell, she passed Officer Hayes' family and supporters in the gallery. Their hostile stares followed her, but she kept her head high. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about standing against a system that protected abusers of power. In her cell that night, Jasmine thought about all she had overcome to reach her position in the military. The extra scrutiny, the need to be twice as good, the constant questioning of her authority. She had faced insurgents in Iraq and Taliban fighters in Afghanistan, but this battle on American soil might prove to be her most difficult yet. Staff Sergeant Agard called out, interrupting her thoughts. "You've got a visitor." Captain Chen waited in the visiting area, a determined look on her face. "We've got work to do," she said, as Jasmine sat down across from her. "The Army is posting your bail tomorrow, and we're going to fight this with everything we've got." For the first time since the incident, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't alone in this fight. Captain Sophia Chen's office at the military base had become command central for Jasmine's defense. Maps, timelines, and photographs covered one wall. Documents and legal precedents were stacked neatly on every available surface. "The courthouse has extensive security camera coverage," Chen explained to Jasmine, who had been released on bail posted by the Army. "There should be clear footage of the entire incident." "Should be." Colonel Briggs emphasized, his expression grim, but the DA's office claims the relevant footage is temporarily unavailable due to technical issues. Jasmine, now dressed in civilian clothes, since she wasn't allowed to wear her uniform while under investigation, crossed her arms. Convenient timing. Too convenient, Chen agreed. "I've filed motions to preserve all evidence, but we need to assume they're already working to bury anything that contradicts their narrative." What they didn't know was that Detective Marcus Reeves had already secured the crucial footage. After copying it to a secure drive, he'd spent the night debating his next move. Coming forward meant risking not just his career, but potentially his safety. The department had ways of dealing with officers who broke the thin blue line. Meanwhile, the incident had sparked intense online discussion. Witness videos had begun circulating fragmented clips that captured parts of the confrontation. Some showed only the aftermath, with Hayes unconscious and Jasmine being arrested. Others included the lead-up, with Hayes blocking Jasmine and their tense exchange. One particular video, shot by a law student who'd been standing nearby, had captured Hayes' slap and the racial slur. The clip was rapidly gaining traction across social media platforms, directly contradicting the official police narrative. The response online divided sharply along racial and political lines. Some viewed Jasmine as a hero standing up against police brutality and racism. Others saw her as a dangerous threat who had attacked a police officer performing his duties. While public opinion battled online, Officer Hayes was recovering in a private hospital room. According to his doctors, he had sustained a concussion and would need time to recuperate. The police union had immediately stepped in, providing him with high-powered attorney Harold Griffith, known for his aggressive defense of officers accused of misconduct. Officer Hayes was simply maintaining courthouse security when he was viciously attacked without provocation, Griffith declared at a press conference outside the hospital. "This assault is part of a disturbing trend of disrespect and violence against our law enforcement officers." When a reporter asked about the video showing Hayes striking first, Griffith dismissed them. Selectively edited clips taken out of context do not tell the whole story. Officer Hayes is a decorated 22-year veteran with an unblemished record of service. That statement was a lie, and Detective Reeves knew it. Hayes had 17 complaints in his personnel file, 9 specifically alleging racial bias or excessive force against people of color. All had been dismissed or buried through internal investigations that Reeves now suspected were deliberately inadequate. Back at the base, Jasmine received unexpected visitors, her mother Grace and younger brother Dion, who had driven overnight from Detroit after learning about her arrest on the news. "Baby, are you okay?" Grace Washington asked, embracing her daughter tightly. At 62, Grace still stood ramrod straight, a habit formed during her 20 years as an Army nurse. "I'm fine, Mom," Jasmine assured her, "just fighting another battle." Dion, a college student studying engineering, looked at his sister with concern. "The news is making you out to be some kind of dangerous criminal." "I know," Jasmine sighed. "But we've been here before, haven't we?" The Washington family understood all too well how systems could be stacked against them. Jasmine's father, Master Sergeant James Washington, had faced discrimination throughout his military career before dying in Iraq 15 years earlier. Grace had raised her children alone afterward, instilling in them both resilience and a fierce sense of justice. "Your father would be proud," Grace said, squeezing Jasmine's hand. "He always taught you to stand up for yourself." While Jasmine reunited with her family, Captain Chen received an anonymous email containing a single video file. The footage clearly showed Hayes initiating the assault and using the racial slur before Jasmine defended herself. The sender had included a brief message: "Not everyone wears the uniform, believes in the cover-up." Chen immediately secured the video and began preparing to use it at the upcoming preliminary hearing. She didn't know who had sent it, possibly Detective Reeves or another witness. But it was exactly what they needed to change the narrative. As Jasmine's case progressed, her struggles triggered memories of combat. She woke up one night in a cold sweat, momentarily confused about whether she was back in Afghanistan. The pressure of fighting not just for her freedom but for her career and reputation was taking its toll. "You know this isn't that different from what we faced overseas," she told Captain Chen during a strategy session. "Different battlefield, same mission, standing up for what's right against those who abuse their power." Chen nodded in understanding. As a JAG officer, she'd seen how justice could be unevenly applied even within the military system she served. "What's our next move?" Jasmine asked, refocusing on the present challenge. "We've got the preliminary hearing tomorrow," Chen replied. "This is where we start turning the tide." "What do you think about how this situation has unfolded so far?" Comment number 1 if you believe Jasmine was justified in defending herself against Officer Hayes' assault. Or comment number 2 if you think she should have handled it differently. Like and subscribe to follow Jasmine's fight against a system that seems determined to punish her for standing up for herself. Is Jasmine's military training going to work against her in court? Will Detective Reeves risk everything to bring the truth to light? What other evidence might emerge as we dive deeper into Officer Hayes' past? Let's find out as we continue this shocking true story. The Montgomery County Courthouse buzzed with tension as Jasmine Washington was escorted into courtroom 3B. Despite being released on bail, the court had mandated that she appear in a jumpsuit and shackles, an unusual requirement that Captain Chen had protested vigorously but unsuccessfully. Media packed the gallery. The case had exploded nationally, becoming a flashpoint in ongoing debates about police accountability, racial justice, and the treatment of military personnel by civilian authorities. Judge Samuel Williams presided, his reputation for pro-police rulings well known throughout Atlanta's legal community. At 68, Williams had spent decades on the bench, developing close relationships with law enforcement and the district attorney's office. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Williams entered. Jasmine stood tall despite the chains around her ankles and wrists. Captain Chen had advised her to appear humble, but Jasmine refused to bow her head. "I've done nothing wrong," she had told Chen. "I won't pretend that I have." District Attorney Walter Simmons approached the podium first, his expensive suit and confident demeanor projecting authority. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward," Simmons began. The defendant, using specialized combat training received from the United States military, viciously attacked Officer Richard Hayes while he was performing his lawful duties. Officer Hayes remains under medical care, suffering from a severe concussion and possible long-term neurological damage. Judge Williams nodded sympathetically. "And the charges: assault on a peace officer, aggravated battery, and resisting arrest," Simmons replied. "Given the defendant's training, we consider her essentially armed at all times." Her hands are lethal weapons. From the gallery, Jasmine's mother, Grace, closed her eyes briefly at this characterization of her daughter. Beside her, Dion clenched his fists in silent anger. Captain Chen rose next.
Your Honor, the prosecution's characterization is not just misleading, it's demonstrably false.
Staff Sergeant Washington acted in self-defense after Officer Hayes physically assaulted her and used a racial slur. We moved to dismiss all charges based on clear evidence of self-defense. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. That's quite an allegation, Captain. Do you have evidence to support this alternative narrative? We do, Your Honor, Chen responded confidently. We have witness testimonies and… Objection, Simmons interrupted. Any civilian witnesses would be biased against law enforcement, and the defendant's military colleagues would naturally support one of their own. Your Honor, Chen countered, dismissing potential witnesses based on assumed bias before even hearing their testimony undermines the entire judicial process. Judge Williams considered this. I'll allow limited witness testimony, but I warn you, Captain, this court won't be turned into a platform for anti-police sentiment. Chen nodded, accepting the small victory. The defense calls Detective Marcus Reeves. A murmur swept through the courtroom as Reeves entered. As a detective from the same department as Hayes, his appearance for the defense was unprecedented. Police officers in the gallery straightened their expressions, hardening as one of their own crossed the invisible line. After being sworn in, Reeves took the stand, his posture rigid with tension, but his voice steady. Detective Reeves Chen began, "What is your relationship to Officer Richard Hayes?" "We work in the same department. I've known him for about 7 years." "And were you present at the courthouse on the day of the incident involving Staff Sergeant Washington?" "I was." Reeves confirmed. "I was there for an unrelated case when I heard the commotion." "Can you describe what you witnessed?" Reeves took a deep breath. "I observed Officer Hayes blocking Staff Sergeant Washington from entering the courtroom. Their exchange became heated. Hayes then struck Sergeant Washington across the face with an open hand. She responded with a defensive maneuver that neutralized the threat. The courtroom erupted. Judge Williams banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. I will have order." Simmons was on his feet. "Your Honor, Detective Reeves is clearly mistaken or lying to protect." "I'm under oath," Reeves interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "And I'm not the only one who saw what happened." Officer Hayes has a documented history of similar incidents that have been systematically buried by our department. "This is outrageous," Simmons exclaimed. "Detective Reeves is making unfounded accusations against a decorated officer and our entire police department." Judge Williams turned to Reeves, his expression severe. "Detective, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support them?" "I do, Your Honor," Reeves replied calmly. "I've brought the security camera footage that the DA's office claimed was unavailable due to technical issues." Chen approached the bench with a flash drive. "Your Honor, we move to enter this into evidence immediately." After a tense exchange and over Simmons' strenuous objections, Judge Williams reluctantly allowed the footage to be played on the courtroom's monitor. The video was damning. It clearly showed Hayes blocking Jasmine their exchange, his unprovoked slap, and his mouth forming what lip readers could later confirm was a racial slur. It also showed Jasmine's response, a textbook defensive technique taught to military police for neutralizing threats with minimal force. The courtroom fell silent as the footage ended. Jasmine's family sat in stunned vindication. Several officers slipped out of the courtroom, unwilling to watch as the official narrative collapsed. "Additionally, Your Honor," Reeves continued, "I've compiled footage from the past 6 months showing Officer Hayes specifically targeting black visitors to the courthouse for additional scrutiny, harassment, and in 3 cases, physical intimidation." This additional footage showed a clear pattern of behavior. Hayes could be seen following black attorneys, witnesses, and defendants, subjecting them to extra searches, blocking their paths, and in one instance, shoving a young black law clerk against a wall while white colleagues walked by. Unhindered, Judge Williams, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the hearing, called for a recess. As the courtroom cleared, Captain Chen turned to Jasmine with cautious optimism. "This is a turning point," she said quietly. "Reeves just risked everything to come forward." Jasmine nodded, watching Reeves exit the courtroom alone, police colleagues parting before him like he carried a contagious disease. He did the right thing. I hope he doesn't pay too high a price for it. When court resumed an hour later, Judge Williams appeared conflicted. The evidence was clear, but ruling against the police department and district attorney would have political and personal consequences. In light of the evidence presented, Williams began reluctantly, "I find insufficient grounds to proceed with the charges as filed. Staff Sergeant Washington is to be released immediately, with all restrictions lifted." It wasn't a complete victory. The judge had stopped short of acknowledging Jasmine's right to self-defense or condemning Hayes' actions, but it was enough for now. The shackles were removed, and Jasmine was free to leave with her family and legal team. Outside the courthouse, they faced a mob of reporters and a divided crowd. Police supporters shouted accusations of betrayal and threats, while others cheered Jasmine as a symbol of resistance against police brutality. Staff Sergeant Washington, one reporter called out, "How does it feel to be vindicated?" Before Jasmine could respond, Captain Chen stepped forward. Justice was served today, but this case highlights ongoing concerns about accountability in law enforcement. Staff Sergeant Washington acted lawfully to defend herself from an unprovoked assault and racial harassment. As they pushed through the crowd toward a waiting military vehicle, someone from the police supporters section shouted a threat. "This isn't over. We know where you live." Colonel Briggs, who had been observing from the background, immediately stepped closer to Jasmine and her family. "We'll arrange security for all of you," he said quietly. This victory may have escalated the danger. Jasmine nodded, the relief of legal vindication, tempered by the knowledge that broader challenges remained. She had won this battle, but the war against systemic injustice continued. As they drove away from the courthouse, Jasmine noticed Detective Reeves standing alone by his car, surrounded by empty parking spaces where his colleagues had moved their vehicles away from his new part, a physical manifestation of his new status as an outcast in the department. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Jasmine offered a respectful nod, which Reeves returned before getting into his car. Two warriors from different worlds, united by a commitment to truth that transcended tribal loyalties. The fight was far from over, but today at least justice had prevailed. The military base provided a temporary sanctuary for Jasmine and her family. After the hearing, Colonel Briggs had arranged for Grace and Dion Washington to stay in on-base guest quarters rather than at their hotel, a decision that proved prescient when harassing phone calls began flooding the hotel's front desk, asking for the family of the cop attacker. 3 days after the hearing, Jasmine sat in Colonel Briggs' office reviewing security protocols with Captain Chen and a base security officer. "The online threats are escalating," the security officer explained, scrolling through printouts of social media posts and forum discussions. "Most are just angry rhetoric, but a few contain specific threats we're taking seriously." One particularly disturbing post had included Jasmine's Detroit home address and her mother's full name. Another contained detailed information about Dion's college schedule and route to classes. "How are they getting this information?" Jasmine asked her. "Professional calm masking, deep concern." "Police databases," Captain Chen replied grimly. "Someone inside the department is leaking your personal details to Hayes' supporters." Colonel Briggs leaned forward. "We've implemented countermeasures. Your family's hotel reservation has been canceled and erased from their system. We've arranged military transport for your brother back to college with a security detail for the next week. Your mother will remain here until things cool down." Jasmine nodded, grateful for the support, but troubled by the necessity. Her vindication in court had triggered a backlash more severe than anticipated. The thin blue line had transformed into something more akin to a battle line. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the media coverage had intensified. Harold Griffith Hayes' attorney held daily press conferences, painting Jasmine as a military operative who had used excessive force against a police officer performing his duty. Officer Hayes suffered a traumatic brain injury that may permanently end his career, Griffith told reporters outside police headquarters. He's a family man with 3 children who may never be the same again. We filed a civil lawsuit against Staff Sergeant Washington for $5 million in damages. The lawsuit claimed permanent neurological damage despite hospital records that showed Hayes had been released after 2 days with a mild concussion. The legal action was clearly retaliatory, designed to drain Jasmine financially and emotionally, even after the criminal charges had been dismissed. In response to the public narrative battle, Atlanta's Black community organized. Churches, civil rights organizations, and community groups held rallies supporting Jasmine and calling for Hayes' termination. Veterans groups also spoke out, condemning the treatment of a decorated service member who had defended herself against assault. District Attorney Simmons found himself caught in a political vice. His traditional police support base demanded he pursue the case against Jasmine through any means possible, while Black voters, a crucial demographic in Atlanta, threatened electoral consequences if he continued what they viewed as persecution of a Black service member. The pressure intensified when Dion Washington was pulled over while driving back to his university. The traffic stop conducted by 2 officers from Hayes' precinct quickly turned hostile. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer demanded, without explaining the reason for the stop. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Dion asked calmly, remembering his sister's advice about police interactions. Out of the car now, the officer's hand moved to his weapon. Dion complied, maintaining a deliberate calm despite his racing heart. As he stood by the roadside, the officers conducted an aggressive search of his car without consent or warrant. "You're Washington's brother, aren't you?" one officer finally asked, standing uncomfortably close. "Think your sister can attack one of ours and there won't be consequences?" The implied threat hung in the air. After 20 tense minutes, they let him go with a warning for a broken taillight, though Dion's car had no such issue. He drove straight to the nearest military installation rather than continuing to campus, certain he was being followed. When Jasmine learned about the incident, her professional demeanor finally cracked. "This has gone beyond harassment," she told Captain Chen. "They're targeting my family now." Dion could have been seriously hurt, or worse. "We're documenting everything," Chen assured her. "These officers are building our case for a federal civil rights investigation." The military community had rallied behind Jasmine in ways she hadn't expected. Fellow MPs organized a protective detail for her family. Soldiers from her unit created a legal defense fund to counter Hayes' lawsuit. Veterans across the country sent messages of support and offers of assistance. Captain Chen had also discovered disturbing information about Hayes' past. Through carefully cultivated sources, she learned that Hayes had been involved in at least 3 previous incidents with female military personnel visiting the courthouse. All 3 cases had been settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements and small payments from the city. "He specifically targeted women in uniform," Chen explained to Jasmine. "You weren't a random victim, you were part of a pattern." "Why wasn't he fired after the first incident?" Jasmine asked. "The same reason he won't be fired now unless we keep pushing," Chen replied. "The system protects its own." Detective Reeves, meanwhile, had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his breach of department protocol by preserving and sharing the security footage. His career hung in limbo, his fellow officers treating him as a pariah for crossing the blue line. Late one night, as Jasmine lay awake in her base quarters, nightmares about her combat tours mixing with anxiety about her family's safety, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hayes will walk free. You should take the deal while you still can." The message confirmed what she had begun to suspect.
there were still negotiations happening behind the scenes, attempts to pressure her into accepting a settlement that would include dropping all allegations against Hayes and signing an RESS NDA. For a moment, Jasmine considered it. The pressure was taking its toll. Her mother was essentially in protective custody. Her brother's education was being disrupted. Her own career remained uncertain, with the Army conducting its own investigation into the incident. Perhaps a quiet resolution would be better for everyone. Then she remembered her father's words spoken during a difficult period when he'd faced discrimination within his unit. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about winning. It's about making sure they don't win by breaking you. Jasmine texted back a single word: no. She wouldn't be broken. Not by Hayes, not by the police department, not by a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, just as she had in combat. The battle lines were drawn, and Jasmine Washington was prepared for war. The Augustus J. Martin Federal Courthouse stood imposing against the Atlanta skyline as Jasmine arrived for the first day of her civil trial. After months of legal maneuvering, Hayes's lawsuit against her had reached the courtroom, while simultaneously Jasmine's countersuit alleging civil rights violations, assault, and defamation against Hayes and the police department was being heard by the same judge. Security was unprecedented. Federal marshals lined the entrance as opposing protesters gathered on either side of barricades. One group carried police flags and signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Support Officer Hayes." The other side displayed military flags alongside banners proclaiming justice for SSG Washington and end police immunity. Jasmine, dressed in her formal military uniform with permission from the Army, walked between Captain Chen and a newly assigned military attorney, Major Derek Coleman, a seasoned JAG officer with extensive civil litigation experience. The Army had fully committed to her defense, recognizing the case's implications for all service members. Inside the courtroom, the jury selection process had been grueling, taking nearly 2 weeks as both sides fought to seat jurors they believed would be sympathetic to their narrative. The final panel of 12 included 3 veterans, 4 people of color, and a mix of professional backgrounds. Judge Eleanor Patel, a respected federal judge known for her strict courtroom management and impartiality, had been assigned the case after 3 other judges recused themselves due to connections with either the police department or military. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Patel entered. After preliminary instructions to the jury, Harold Griffith presented his opening statement for Hayes's case. Elegantly dressed and projecting righteous indignation, Griffith painted Hayes as a dedicated public servant brutally attacked while performing his duties. "Officer Richard Hayes has served this community faithfully for 22 years, Griffith began. On March 15th, he was doing what he does every day, ensuring the safety and security of our courthouse. For that dedication, he received a vicious attack from a trained military combatant who used techniques designed for the battlefield against a civilian peace officer." Griffith walked closer to the jury. "The evidence will show that Staff Sergeant Washington used excessive and unnecessary force against Officer Hayes, causing permanent neurological damage that has ended his career and diminished his quality of life. We will demonstrate that her actions were not those of someone defending herself, but of an individual who chose violence when confronted with lawful authority." When it was the defense's turn, Major Coleman approached the jury with measured confidence. "This case isn't complicated," Coleman stated simply. Staff Sergeant Jasmine Washington, a decorated combat veteran who has served this country through 3 tours in war zones, was physically assaulted and racially abused by Officer Hayes while attempting to perform her duty as a witness in a Fording Solve court case. Coleman gestured toward Jasmine. "The evidence will show that Officer Hayes targeted Staff Sergeant Washington from the moment she entered the courthouse, subjecting her to harassment and discriminatory treatment before eventually physically striking her in an unprovoked assault." Staff Sergeant Washington responded with the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat using a defensive technique taught to military police specifically to subdue aggressors without causing lasting harm. He continued, "You will also learn that Officer Hayes has a documented history of similar behavior toward women in uniform and people of color behavior that his department has systematically concealed rather than corrected. This case is about accountability and whether we truly believe that no one, not even a police officer, is above the law." The trial began in earnest, with Hayes taking the stand as the first witness. Wearing a neck brace that medical experts would later testify was unnecessary, Hayes described his version of events in emotional detail. "I was just doing my job, making sure everyone was safe." Hayes testified, his voice catching. "She became increasingly aggressive when I asked for standard identification. Before I knew what was happening, she attacked me. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital." During cross-examination, Major Coleman approached with transcript printouts from Hayes's body camera, which had been activated during the incident. "Officer Hayes, your body camera captured audio of your interaction with Staff Sergeant Washington, correct?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, but the video wasn't properly oriented to capture. Just the audio for now." Coleman interrupted gently. "Your camera recorded you saying, and I quote, 'You people always think you deserve special treatment.' What did you mean by you people?" "I meant military personnel," Hayes replied quickly. "Really? Because earlier that same day, your camera recorded you allowing 3 white military officers to enter the courthouse with minimal security screening, telling Officer Davis, and again I quote, 'These guys are all right, they're at the real deal.' Why the different treatment for Staff Sergeant Washington?" Hayes flushed. "Each security situation is unique." Coleman nodded. "Indeed. Let's talk about those unique situations." What followed was a methodical dismantling of Hayes' testimony as Coleman introduced evidence of Hayes' pattern of discriminatory behavior. Security logs showed Hayes had conducted additional screening on 87% of black courthouse visitors compared to 12% of white visitors. Complaint records obtained through subpoena despite department resistance revealed 17 formal complaints of racial harassment and excessive force. As Hayes' testimony concluded, the momentum had clearly shifted. His credibility had been severely damaged, and even his own attorney appeared frustrated by his performance on the stand. The next day brought a surprise as Major Coleman called a new witness, Marine Corps Captain Alyssa Rodriguez. "Captain Rodriguez, have you ever encountered Officer Richard Hayes?" Coleman asked, after establishing her credentials. "Yes," Rodriguez replied firmly. 2 years ago while reporting to this same courthouse to provide testimony in a military matter. Can you describe that encounter?" Rodriguez straightened in her seat. "Officer Hayes subjected me to excessive and inappropriate screening procedures. When I objected, he became physically aggressive, grabbing my arm and telling me that playing soldier didn't make me special." "Did you report this incident?" "Yes, to both the police department and my commanding officer." "And what happened?" "I was approached by a city attorney who offered a small settlement if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. My commanding officer advised me to accept rather than risk career repercussions from a prolonged legal battle." Hayes' attorney objected vigorously, arguing that past incidents were irrelevant, but Judge Patel allowed the testimony to continue after Coleman established a pattern of behavior relevant to Jasmine's defense. 2 more female military personnel testified to similar experiences, with Hayes creating a damning portrait of an officer who specifically targeted women in uniform for harassment and intimidation. As the trial progressed to its second week, Jasmine took the stand. Dressed in her formal uniform with ribbons and medals displayed as permitted by military regulations, she presented a striking contrast to Hayes' theatrical neck brace and pained expressions. Jasmine recounted her military service 12 years, including combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where she had led security operations and trained local police forces. She described the incident with Hayes in precise professional language, explaining her training in minimal force defensive techniques. As a military police officer, she testified, "I'm trained to neutralize threats with the minimum necessary force. After Officer Hayes struck me and used a racial slur, I employed a standard defensive technique designed to subdue without causing lasting injury." During cross-examination, Griffith attempted to portray Jasmine's military training as making her a dangerous weapon. "Isn't it true that you've been trained to kill with your bare hands?" he demanded. "No, that's not accurate," Jasmine replied calmly. "I've been trained to protect lives, including my own, using appropriate force for each situation. The technique I used on Officer Hayes was specifically taught for situations requiring non-lethal intervention." "But you knocked him unconscious," Griffith exclaimed. "A temporary state resulting from the carotid restraint technique, which restricts blood flow briefly but causes no permanent damage when properly executed. Officer Hayes was unconscious for approximately 20 seconds. His medical records confirm he sustained no lasting injury beyond a mild concussion, despite his claims to the contrary." As Jasmine stepped down from the witness stand, she caught the eye of a juror, an older black woman who had served in the Navy. Something passed between them, a moment of recognition between two women who understood what it meant to serve a country that didn't always value their service equally. The medical testimony further undermined Hayes' case. Neurologists testified that his claimed permanent neurological damage was unsupported by any objective testing. His own department's medical leave policy was introduced, showing that officers with genuine concussions typically return to duty within 1 to 2 weeks. By the end of the second week, as both sides prepared for closing arguments, an unexpected development occurred. Detective Reeves, still on administrative leave, came forward with text messages from Hayes to fellow officers before the incident with Jasmine. "Got another military princess coming in today," one message read. "Betting $50 I can make her lose her cool. These uniform types can't handle being put in their place." Judge Patel initially ruled the evidence inadmissible due to its late introduction, but when media outlets published the messages that evening, the damage was done. Hayes' lawsuit was revealed as not just unfounded, but predicated on a deliberate provocation. As the jury began deliberations, Atlanta held its breath, waiting for a verdict that would either reinforce the status quo or signal that change was possible, even in systems designed to resist it. The jury had been deliberating for 3 days when Detective Marcus Reeves received an anonymous text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the content was explosive. A series of screenshots showing a group chat between Officer Hayes and several colleagues discussing not just the incident with Jasmine, but a coordinated effort to manipulate evidence and pressure witnesses. Reeves stared at his phone, calculating the risks. Already suspended and under investigation for his previous testimony, bringing this new evidence forward could end his career permanently. The department had made it clear that his actions were viewed as a betrayal of the Brotherhood. Yet the evidence before him revealed corruption that went beyond Hayes to implicate senior officers and possibly members of the district attorney's office. This wasn't just about one racist cop anymore. It was about a systemic effort to obstruct justice. After a sleepless night, Reeves made his decision. He forwarded the messages to Judge Patel's chambers with a sworn affidavit regarding their provenance, then sent copies to both legal teams. Whatever happened to his career, he couldn't live with himself if he remained silent. Judge Patel immediately called an emergency hearing without the jury present. Her expression was thunderous as the attorneys gathered. "I have received disturbing evidence suggesting witness tampering, evidence manipulation, and potentially criminal obstruction of justice," she announced. "Before I decide how to proceed, I want to hear from both parties." Hayes' attorney, Harold Griffith, immediately objected to the introduction of the new evidence. "Your Honor, these alleged messages appear well after discovery has closed. Their authenticity cannot be verified, and Detective Reeves has already demonstrated bias against my client." Major Coleman countered forcefully. "Your Honor,
If these messages are authentic, and we believe forensic analysis will confirm they are, they reveal not just misconduct by Officer Hayes, but a coordinated effort by multiple officials to pervert the course of justice. This goes to the heart of both cases before you. After hearing arguments, Judge Patel made her ruling. I am ordering an immediate forensic examination of the original devices. If these messages are authenticated, there will be severe consequences for all involved. This court will not be party to a miscarriage of justice. The hearing adjourned in chaos, with reporters rushing to file stories and legal teams frantically revising strategies. Jasmine, who had been present for the hearing, found herself at the center of a storm that had grown far beyond her original encounter with Hayes. "What happens now?" she asked Captain Chen as they left the courthouse. "Now we wait," Chen replied. "If those messages are authenticated, Hayes's case collapses and our countersuit gains substantial ground. But more importantly, it could trigger a federal investigation into the entire department." The forensic examination took less than 24 hours to complete. The messages were authentic and they were damning. Hayes and at least 5 other officers had conspired to target Jasmine specifically because of her race and military status, part of what they called attitude adjustments for military types who don't respect real police. More disturbing were messages showing coordination with individuals in the district attorney's office to withhold exculpatory evidence and pressure witnesses to change their statements. One exchange explicitly discussed making the courthouse security footage disappear after the incident. When Judge Patel reconvened court the next morning, her decision was swift and unequivocal. She dismissed Hayes' lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. More significantly, she referred the matter to the U.S. Department of Justice for criminal investigation. The evidence before this court suggests not just individual misconduct, but potentially a criminal conspiracy to deprive Staff Sergeant Washington of her civil rights, Patel stated. This court lacks jurisdiction to address all aspects of these allegations, but federal authorities do not. The courtroom erupted at the announcement. Hayes, present for the ruling, slumped in his chair as the theatrical neck brace suddenly seemed to weigh him down for real. His police supporters in the gallery sat in stunned silence, while Jasmine's military colleagues maintained rigid discipline despite their obvious satisfaction. Outside, the courthouse media outlets swarmed for comments. District Attorney Walter Simmons, suddenly facing potential criminal exposure himself, held an emergency press conference where he announced an internal review of his office's handling of the case and placed 2 assistant DAs on administrative leave. The police department responded with similar damage control, announcing Hayes' suspension pending termination proceedings and promising a comprehensive review of departmental practices. The police chief, who had staunchly defended Hayes throughout the ordeal, now claimed zero tolerance for the behavior revealed in these communications. For Jasmine and her legal team, the vindication was bittersweet. The civil portion of her countersuit would continue now, with substantially strengthened evidence, but the personal toll had been immense. Her family had endured months of harassment and threats. Her military career, while intact, had been sidetracked during a crucial promotion period. Detective Reeves faced an uncertain future as well. Though public opinion now hailed him as a whistleblower hero, the reality within law enforcement was more complicated. The thin blue line didn't forgive those who crossed it, even when they did so in service of justice. A week after Judge Patel's ruling, as preparations for the continuation of Jasmine's civil suit proceeded, Hayes' attorney approached with a settlement offer. Hayes would admit wrongdoing, the department would pay substantial damages, and policy changes would be implemented regarding treatment of military personnel and racial sensitivity training. The catch: Jasmine would need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from discussing the case publicly. "It's a generous offer financially," Major Coleman acknowledged, as they discussed the proposal in a secure conference room at the military base, "and it guarantees policy changes without the uncertainty of continued litigation." Jasmine considered the option carefully. The NDA would silence her, preventing her from speaking about her experience at a time when her voice could make a difference. Yet settlement would provide immediate closure and allow her to move forward with her career.
"What about Reeves and the others who came forward?" she asked. "This settlement protects Hayes and the department from public accountability."
True, Captain Chen conceded. "Though the federal investigation will continue regardless of your settlement."
Jasmine thought about her father's military service, about the discrimination he had faced silently to protect his career and provide for his family. She thought about her brother Dayon, harassed by police simply for being related to her. She thought about Captain Rodriguez and the other women who had finally spoken out about Hayes after being silenced by similar NDAs.
No deal, Jasmine decided firmly. Not with an NDA attached. They don't get to buy my silence.
Her attorneys nodded, having anticipated her response. "We'll counter with terms that include public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and no confidentiality provisions," Major Coleman said.
"They'll likely refuse and will proceed to trial for the civil rights violations."
As they prepared to leave, Jasmine received a text message from an unknown number. Wary after months of harassment, she almost didn't open it. When she did, she found a simple message: "Thank you for not backing down.
You're changing things that needed changing for a long time. M.R." Detective Reeves, it seemed, approved of her decision to reject the silencing payment. His career might be over, but his conscience was clear. Jasmine found herself hoping he might consider a second career in military law enforcement, where his integrity would be valued rather than punished. That evening, as Jasmine returned to her quarters, she found Colonel Briggs waiting with unexpected news. The Army, recognizing the significance of her case, had made a decision regarding her future. "The Pentagon is watching this case closely," Washington Briggs informed her. "Whatever happens with the civil suit, they want you to know your career isn't at risk. In fact, they're offering you a choice." Jasmine listened as Briggs outlined her options. An honorable discharge with full benefits if she wanted to leave the service after this ordeal, or a promotion and transferred to the Judge Advocate General's Corps, where her experience could help shape military justice policy. "They're creating a new position," Briggs explained. "Liaison between military and civilian law enforcement, developing training and protocols to prevent incidents like yours from happening to other service members." For the first time in months, Jasmine felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. Her stand for justice hadn't ended her career. It had opened a new path where her experience could create meaningful change. As Briggs left, Jasmine stood at the window, watching the American flag wave in the evening breeze over the base. The system had tried to break her, to force her into accepting injustice as the price of peace. Instead, she had held firm, and the system itself was beginning to bend. The fight wasn't over, but the turning point had come. Not just for Jasmine Washington, but for all those who would come after her. 6 months after Judge Patel's landmark ruling, the landscape of law enforcement in Atlanta had changed dramatically. The Justice Department's investigation had expanded beyond Hayes and his immediate colleagues to encompass systemic practices within the police department and prosecutor's office. Indictments had been issued against Hayes and 3 other officers for civil rights violations, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. District Attorney Walter Simmons had resigned rather than face a recall election, replaced by a reform candidate who promised transparency and accountability. The police chief had taken early retirement, and a civilian oversight board with real enforcement powers had been established by the city council. On a crisp autumn morning, Jasmine Washington entered the same courthouse where her ordeal had begun, this time not as a defendant, but as an honored witness. Dressed in her Army uniform, now bearing the insignia of her promotion to Master Sergeant, she prepared to testify before the newly formed Congressional Subcommittee on Law Enforcement and Military Cooperation. The hearing room was packed with press, military personnel, law enforcement officials, and civil rights advocates. At the center table sat Detective Marcus Reeves, now Deputy Director Reeves of the Atlanta Police Department's new Accountability and Transparency Division. a position created in the wake of the scandal. As Jasmine took her seat at the witness table, she caught Reeves's eye. They hadn't spoken directly since the trial, both careful to avoid any appearance of coordination that might undermine the reforms they were working toward. But in that brief glance was mutual respect forged in shared sacrifice for principle. Master Sergeant Washington, the committee chairwoman, began, "Thank you for appearing today. Your experience has catalyzed significant reforms in how law enforcement and military personnel interact. Could you share your perspective on the changes implemented so far and what remains to be done?" Jasmine leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The past 6 months have seen meaningful progress in Atlanta and several other jurisdictions that have adopted similar reforms. The establishment of joint training protocols between military and civilian law enforcement has been particularly effective in reducing incidents of miscommunication and conflict." She continued outlining specific improvements while acknowledging remaining challenges. Her testimony was measured and professional, focused on systems rather than individuals, exactly the approach that had earned her the respect of both military and law enforcement reformers. After the hearing, as Jasmine gathered her materials, her mother Grace approached from the gallery, pride evident in her bearing. At 63, Grace Washington still carried herself with military precision, a habit from her nursing days that had only strengthened during the ordeal of her daughter's case. "Your father would have been so proud," Grace said, softly embracing Jasmine. "Not just of what you did, but how you did it." Dion joined them now, in his final year of engineering studies. The harassment he had faced had strengthened rather than deterred, him inspiring a senior project on body camera technology designed to prevent tampering and evidence manipulation. "The dean wants to connect me with some tech investors," he told Jasmine excitedly. "They think it could be implemented nationwide." Jasmine smiled at her brother's enthusiasm. Their family had always turned adversity into opportunity, a legacy from their father that continued to shape their paths. As they exited the building, they passed a small group of protesters holding signs supporting Hayes, who had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking officials. Despite overwhelming evidence, some still viewed him as a victim of political correctness rather than the instigator of his own downfall. Jasmine didn't engage with them. Their right to protest was part of the same constitutional principles she had sworn to defend, even when those principles protected views she found abhorrent. Back at the Pentagon, where Jasmine now worked in her new role, developing cross-jurisdictional training protocols, her office walls displayed two significant mementos. The first was her father's folded flag, a reminder of ultimate sacrifice. The second was the formal commendation she had received for extraordinary courage in upholding military values in the face of unjust adversity. The commendation had come with an unexpected opportunity. Jasmine now regularly conducted training sessions for both military personnel and civilian law enforcement on de-escalation techniques, constitutional rights, and cultural competency. Her classes were oversubscribed with officers from departments nationwide, recognizing the value of learning from her experience rather than repeating Hayes's mistakes. One afternoon, as Jasmine concluded a joint training session for military, police, and civilian officers at the very courthouse where her confrontation with Hayes had occurred, she noticed a familiar face at the back of the room. Captain Sophia Chen, now Major Chen, waited until the other participants had filed out before approaching. "Your program is being implemented at bases nationwide," Chen informed her. "The incident reports show a 60% reduction in confrontations between military personnel and civilian authorities." "That's good progress," Jasmine acknowledged, "but we still have work to do." Chen nodded. "Always. But sometimes it's important to recognize the victories, however incomplete." As they walked through the courthouse hallways, the same corridors where Hayes had harassed Jasmine, they passed the security checkpoint.
The officers staffing it, graduates of Jasmine's training program, offered respectful nods to both women without the excessive scrutiny or harassment that had once been routine for military personnel, particularly those of color. Outside, Deputy Director Reeves was conducting a community outreach event, part of the department's efforts to rebuild trust with Atlanta's diverse neighborhoods. When he spotted Jasmine, he excused himself briefly to greet her. "Master Sergeant," he said, formally extending his hand. "Deputy Director," she replied, with equal formality, though both allowed small smiles at the titles that represented their unexpected career advancements. "Your training program is making a difference," Reeves told her. "The old guard resisted at first, but the younger officers get it. They don't want to be the next Hayes." "And the department supports your reforms?" Jasmine asked. "Publicly, enthusiastically. Privately, there's still resistance," Reeves admitted. "Change is slow, especially in institutions built on tradition and hierarchy. But it's happening." As they parted ways, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. One moment of refusing to be victimized had cascaded into institutional changes affecting thousands. Her individual stand for justice had evolved into systemic reform. That evening, Jasmine called her mother and brother for their weekly check-in. The harassment had finally subsided, allowing them to resume normal lives. Grace was volunteering with a veteran support group while Dion's body camera technology was entering preliminary testing with several police departments. "How was your day?" Grace asked. A question that had once been routine before the Hayes incident had made every day a battle. Jasmine smiled at the normalcy of it. "Productive. The training program's expanding again. And I ran into Reeves at the courthouse." "How's he doing?" Dion asked. "Making progress, facing resistance. The usual." Jasmine understood Reeves' position intimately. They had both chosen to challenge systems from within rather than abandon them to the haze of the world. After ending the call, Jasmine stood at her apartment window, looking out over the Washington, D.C. skyline. In the distance, the monuments to American ideals stood illuminated against the night sky, symbols of principles worth defending, even when the institutions meant to uphold them fell short. Hayes had slapped her that day in the courthouse because he believed he could do so with impunity, protected by a system that valued his authority over her humanity. He had been wrong not just about Jasmine's capacity to defend herself, but about the system's ultimate capacity to correct itself. When confronted with undeniable injustice, the correction had been imperfect and incomplete, as all human endeavors were. Hayes's 3-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 1 year seemed inadequate for his actions and the conspiracy he had participated in. The departmental reforms, while significant, still faced resistance from entrenched interests. The Civilian Oversight Board struggled with limited resources and political pressure. Yet, change had come. Policies had shifted. Awareness had grown. And most importantly, other service members would not face what Jasmine had faced, at least not without recourse and institutional support. As Master Sergeant Jasmine Washington prepared for another day of building bridges between the institutions she had served and challenged, she carried with her the knowledge that standing firm against injustice created ripples far beyond the initial confrontation. Those ripples had become waves of change, washing against institutions resistant to reform, but ultimately reshaping them through persistent pressure. The battle for justice never ended. But today, at least the battlefield looked different than it had before she had stood her ground in an Atlanta courthouse and refused to be a victim of prejudice and power. What do you think about this story? Was justice truly served? Do you believe the changes implemented will create lasting reform, or will the system eventually revert to protecting its own? Comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found Jasmine's story inspiring. Thank you for watching this powerful true story of courage, justice, and systemic change. Remember that one person standing up for what's right can create ripples that become waves of transformation. See you in the next video. Jasmine Washington's journey illustrates powerful truths about justice and institutional change. First, standing firm against injustice, even when painful and costly, can create ripples that transform entire systems. One person's refusal to accept mistreatment sparked reforms, affecting thousands of lives. Second, accountability requires courage from within institutions. Detective Reeves demonstrated that true loyalty means upholding justice, not protecting wrongdoing. Third, change happens when diverse communities unite around shared principles. Military personnel, civil rights groups, and reform-minded law enforcement created momentum that overcame entrenched resistance. Most importantly, this story teaches us that systems designed to resist change can be reformed when confronted with undeniable truth and sustained pressure. Change is never complete or perfect, but each step forward creates space for further progress. The struggle for justice doesn't end with individual victories, but continues through the institutional reforms they inspire. Jasmine's story reminds us that the most meaningful change often begins with a single act of courage. What moments in your life required you to stand up against injustice? Share your experiences in the comments below. If you found Jasmine's story inspiring, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement to stand their ground in difficult situations. Remember, as Jasmine's father told her, sometimes standing your ground isn't about winning. It's about making sure they don't win by breaking you. Thank you for watching, and stay strong in your own battles for justice.